die. Okay, so these are the new ideas that are coming up in the moral basis of individualism. She abandons this work. There are some other ideas in this progression which I'll say something about later, but in writing Atlas Shrugged, she goes a level deeper, and that's what I want to talk about right now. She gets the idea of what she called values for weeds, sort of informally to herself as she was writing this. Now, to see what this means, we have to step back a bit and trace her use of the word valuing. In the We the Living and Little Street notes, right, a value was something profound and metaphysical. You'd have aesthetic values, moral values. You know, your socks would not be values. You know, it was something grand, metaphysical, life-changing, life-shaping. The drapes you had in your house wouldn't be values by those standards, even if they were really nice drapes and you liked them. By the time of the Fountainhead, we get a little bit of a more extended sense of it, because Dominique is non-valuing when she's not doing things like selecting drapes, and she's just not making any choices at all. So you have some sense that any consciously selected thing is a value, which means that there's something that's a piece about all conscious selection and direction. There's the same process going on, maybe with differences in degree or intensity, in picking out your clothing in the morning and deciding on your career, at least if you do them both excellently, if you do them both well in the way that Ayn Rand heroes do them. But she doesn't see the same process, or it's essentially at the deepest level, notwithstanding important differences, the same process as taking place in plants. It's inherently a conscious process. And Leonard Peikoff pointed out in, I think it was in his Centenary Reminiscences on Ayn Rand, that at this earlier stage in her thinking, she defined the value as that which one seeks to gain or keep, with the word seeking denoting something conscious. And that later she changed it to the definition we know from Atlas and beyond, that which one acts to gain or keep. We have the idea that even plants and animals have values in the sense of things that they select in order to, things that they select which they need in order to live. Now, exactly when she gets this, she said she didn't get it until writing Galt's speech, and you don't find any full expressions of it in her journals until then, but you find various gropings and getting closer to it and so forth. Now, this is an important idea for a number of reasons. It makes human life continuous in important ways with lower forms of life. That makes it easier to see the objectivity of values. And in particular, it lets us get rid of a kind of disconnect that previous philosophers couldn't get rid of between living and living man's life. You might think, and Ayn Rand herself thinks in some of her notes, that what the ultimate value isn't life, staying alive versus being dead, but living in the way proper to man, rather than as Peter Keating lives or something. And so kind of standards of propriety are built into the goal to begin with, are built into the goal of life. And if that's the case, that is, if the ultimate value is living a John Galt-like life rather than a Peter Keating-like life, there's some question as to how one validates that. What if somebody said the ultimate value is living a Mother Teresa-like life, or living a life that's mostly John Galt-like but involves, after you've made your fortune, giving it away to charity, or something like that, which won't, kill you, as everyone would be dead if we tried to live like Mother Teresa. So this perspective and I'll say how in a moment, enables us to get around that, to get past that, and to see how one could validate the content of the standard man's life, the content of be like John Galt, not like Peter Keating, by seeing how this makes life itself possible, how this is the only way to survive. We see gropings towards that in the earlier notes, but it's now clear in Atlas. Incidentally, I talk a lot about this issue in the first Ocon course I gave, the course on Aristotle as ethicist, where I talk about the difference between Ayn Rand and Aristotle's ethics. And this comes up there. So I refer you to that for a kind of full treatment of that issue. Okay, so prior to Atlas, we have the idea of values as things that are conscious and chosen. We now have broadened it in the case, by the time of Atlas Shrugged, to that which something acts to gain or keep. Now, two consequences of this broadening. The one consequence, well, one major one that the others are derivative of. The central consequence of this broadening is that we can now tie the concept valuing to life as such. Because we could ask, what does the two in act to gain or keep mean? When you seek to gain or keep something, what it is to seek something is something that's directly introspectable. It's to set your mind towards something and go after it. That's not the case of what it is to act to gain or keep something. In a sense of two, that includes a begonia, because begonias don't do that. And so when you have the idea that there's a concept of value as something that be one a human being, a dog, or a plant, acts to gain or keep, you see some fundamental similarity between the directedness of all these actions. And you're trying to identify what that similarity is between the directed quality of all these actions, that which gives rise to the direction of them. Now, we've seen that she had this similarity in mind all along, because the wanting, which was Kira's ability to direct her life, was the life itself. It was like the blood vessels. Blood vessels being something that don't decide and choose. It's a vegetative or nutritive process. That is blood vessels doing what they do is like a plant doing what it does, right? But now we have that focus and center stage. And we had the idea, when we were talking about valuing as a conscious process, that it involves the projection of a purpose, right? And then that in itself is an act of valuing, and the selecting of other things in accordance with that purpose. So you go for things, but the structure of your going for things involves integrating things in response to some situation. Remember, we talked about the architectural problem. You project some central idea as a solution to that problem, as a way to proceed in light of that problem, and then your action as a whole exhibits a kind of directed, integrated quality, because you use that central idea as a standard in accordance with which you select all the actions and all the details of the actions and products. Well, if you go broader from that idea, you have the idea that a value presupposes a purpose, and more generally, a value presupposes some kind of a context in which it can arrive, like the architectural problem. Broaden that from consciously selected values to all values, and you have the idea that a value presupposes an actor, which we've had all along, something that does the valuing and goes after the thing that's valued. And now it presupposes an action an actor acting in the face of an alternative. And what are the different alternatives? And the ultimate alternative is the alternative between existence and non-existence. And it's the things that have to act in the face of this alternative, namely living things, that exhibit this quality of acting towards things. What acting to do something is, that feature of the world comes up, and only could come up, in the case of living things. Why? Because acting to requires there to be some alternative or goal, some end that selects the means, so that the means are in order for the end to come about. And that arises only in life because, one, and these are two perspectives of looking at the same fact, only living things act in the face of some alternative. And two, and this way I think is sometimes easier to think about it, only life is an end in itself, literally. That is, what is life? Life is a process of action aimed at that very same process of action. To borrow a term from the environmentalists, life is it's more than, but this is life is a sustainable process. Life isn't it's a self-sustaining process, right? But it's not just one particular process that is life, the process that a begonia goes through, but it's something more abstract than that. Life is a process which is aimed at the continuance of that process and of the agent performing that process as a performer of that process. And any process that is like that is a life, in whatever ways the lives may differ, whether it's, collecting sun rays and making food, or the very different going around and tearing up things that do that to eat. Okay, so we have the idea that life makes valuing possible and necessary, that values arise only in the context of life. Valuing is what living things do and what their living consists in. It's directing themselves towards being things that continue on directing themselves towards these very things. Now you can literally say that somebody like the villains any Ayn Rand villain is in a